Well, welcome to episode 2 of We'll Figure It Out, which is the series of interviews with some of the inspirational people that are featured in the book, The Power of Us. In episode 1, I was in Sunderland and also Melbourne. Not an easy thing to do. But in episode 2, I've gone to Santa Monica, where I've been several times now. And as you can see by the green screen backdrop, if you believe that schools are not the places for students to understand the world, then this is probably not the video for you. 5 years ago, Jean Clover, who from High Tech High, said, you really need to go and visit this school in Santa Monica. And so we went. We were organising educational study tours, and what we saw completely blew me away. And as you watch this interview, please don't get sucked into dismissing New Roads simply because it's a private school. I firmly believe that new ideas don't cost anything. And the way that you'll hear Luthern describe the school, you'll realize it's far from a typical private school. They term it a private school with a public heart, and I think that's pretty much spot on. It's also a school as a social laboratory, which was set up back in the 70s. And I think that's really important at this time. At the very moment that I'm recording this introduction, the President of the United States of America is in Kenosha. It seems to me deliberately inciting division and discord, which is why we need more schools like New Roads. So please enjoy the wisdom and the insights of their inspirational leader, Luthern Williams, and I love the bones of this man. Luthern, it's fantastic to see you again. The last time we saw each other was in Melbourne, I think, wasn't it, at that Nelson Mandela exhibition? Wow. And we were due to see you in May before the coronavirus, because viewers need to know that we take educators to New Roads School every time we go there. But just for those people who may not be familiar with New Roads, could you just give us a little bit of background on the philosophy?
Well, I'll just sort of start by talking about the school and where it comes out of. I think that New Roads as a school really comes from the failure in large part of Brown versus the Board of Education, and the notion that schools should be integrated, and that children of different backgrounds should live and learn together if this great American social experiment was going to work, and if we were going to close the opportunity gap, in our country. That largely didn't happen. And in 1992, after the riots in Los Angeles, the founders looked around and they said, in 1994 in Los Angeles, there isn't a racially, socioeconomically, and culturally integrated school in Los Angeles. And they said, we have to found one. For them, it was a moral imperative, but I also think they thought it was an imperative in order to save the country in some ways. I think they felt that these children needed to begin to live and learn together. And through living and learning together, they would be able to encounter each other, learn from one another, and it would expand them into citizens who would really embrace the humanity of other people, the full range of humanity, would embrace the earth and would embrace themselves. And that they would begin to appreciate that everybody brings something to the table. Everybody has a gift, and that we are enriched and more creative and better problem solvers when we come together to solve the problems in society. And so there was always an emphasis that the education should be meaningful, relevant, connected, and contextual, and that there shouldn't be a separation between basically the curriculum of school and the curriculum of life.
People may not know, but it's an independent school. So was there any intention originally for it to have been a government school?
Yes, there was. Initially, they thought that they wanted the school to be a charter, but they also felt that it was still, even though it had more freedom than a traditional public school in America, it was still very much hamstrung to some extent by a bureaucracy. And they wanted to be able to build a curriculum that would be responsive to the students and responsive to the needs of students who would be living in the contemporary world. And so they tried actually to make it a charter, but that just failed. And they went to the private model because they felt that it was much less regulated and it would allow for the kind of innovation in teaching and learning and curriculum that would prepare this incredibly diverse group of students for the world. Because the foundation of the school, they had decided from the beginning that it had to reflect the socioeconomic, racial, and cultural diversity of Los Angeles. And so they've given away, or the school has given away about $120 million since its founding in order to invest in the diversity that's the foundation for the education.
Which kind of makes it unique, it seems to me. I mean, I know some independent schools give scholarships, but not to the extent that you did. So have you ever encountered any kind of resistance? You're based in Santa Monica. You've got a fairly wealthy clientele who are sending the kids to your school. Did you ever get any kind of resistance of why these kids from Compton also going to the school?
Well, I think that and you've said this before, David, when we've talked, I think New York's built on this idea of inclusion. So we're very clear with our parents about, what the student composition is and that we think it's essential to providing the most enriching educational environment. And so many of our parents, and some of them are extremely wealthy, and we have some children who, where there's food insecurity or there's home insecurity, and they all mix together. And I think part of what our parents want is they want their children to be prepared not only to go to college if that's the path that they choose, but they want them to be prepared for life. They want them to know how to engage in a meaningful way, in a respectful way with other people. And so in some ways, it's the flip opposite of people's stereotype of Los Angeles, because I think the parents who are generally attracted to us want a more grounded experience for their children that's more reflective of life.
Sure, and I think that works incredibly well, but it also seems to me to be an incredibly brave step to take to, on top of that, as you say, social experiment. There is an overt sense of social activism. I want to share with people. You won't see this, Luthern, but I just want to share. If people go on the website, that what they see is this. This is your vision statement. Could you just talk us through how you managed to get, for want of a, to put it crudely, incredibly wealthy parents who want to send their kids to Ivy League universities to sign up to a vision which, frankly, most of the more radical schools that I've visited would never claim to be this kind of socially active?
Well, I think that part of it is that, when we look at sort of systems of oppression, we also contextualize it in terms of well-being. We think about, the extent to which well-being is about our understanding of identity in a relational sense. And so we do a lot of work with Dr. Dan Siegel, and he wrote the book, The Developing Mind. And Dan has this theory of integration that you honor the differences and you promote the linkages. He said that's the basis of actually a healthy mind, but we've extended that to the notion of community. And so our parents realized that by the kids actually appreciating understanding of identity as relational and not just the notion of a separate self, it actually contributes to their sense of well-being. And that they're not only doing this for others, they're doing this for themselves. And so I think our parents understand that they are giving their children a foundation of well-being that will help them find true fulfillment in their lives, and also the tools to be able to have enriching relationships across differences, and which is going to prepare them for the world of work. I mean, the demographics in the United States have changed dramatically, and our children are what I call the diversity natives. They are very comfortable being able to engage with people from all walks of life, with all different perspectives and backgrounds. And they see that everybody brings something to the table, and that they can do so much more if they work together. And to me, that's what's missing in our country right now.
That's for sure. So you've said, when we've talked about this before, that diversity and equity are kind of the cornerstones of your curriculum. Could you just talk us through how that works in practice?
Well, I think that it goes back to, David, thinking about, because I was thinking about this morning, about education really as a tool for adapting to and improving our environment. I mean, at some point, this sort of Prussian model of education was revolutionary, where one size fits all. I mean, it was appropriate for that world that existed. Um, the world has changed dramatically since then. And that model of education is no longer effective for the 21st century. And so I think what New Roads had to do from the very beginning was it had to have some fundamental assumptions that live in its program. I mean, one of those assumptions is that every child has a gift that they bring. I think another assumption is that there had to be a secure attachment between the child and the teacher and the child and the school as a foundation for them to be able to express their authentic selves, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And then they needed to learn how to come together collectively in order to problem solve creatively. And so that's built in from the very beginning. The kids have choice. From the time they're in kindergarten, they have electives. I remember in fact, in the elementary school, they had come up with the electives that are taught on Fridays. I remember there was like the kids who wanted the Jedi elective, which I loved, where we're really kind of asking them, what is on your mind? What are you wondering about? Let's figure out sort of tools to be able to solve the problems you're wondering about. In the middle school, there's the Passion Project, which really is about what are you passionate about? How can you sort of take the skills and knowledge that you have to pursue that passion? In the high school, it's the independent study. So it's not only the diversity of race or culture or socioeconomic class, but it's diversity in terms of interest. It's diversity in terms of what draws children. So the program provides a solid academic base, but it also allows them to explore areas of passion. There are 65 electives in the high school. There are electives in the middle school, and we've maintained that in our remote program, which I'm so proud of our faculty for. And the arts are central to New Roads. They're foundational because we believe that the arts, at New Roads, we tap into the arts not only as a creative outlet, but as an intellectual medium. And all of our teachers teach it as both an exercise in the heart and the head. And we realize that creativity, imagination is a muscle that must be built, and that you can then apply that to every subject area. And that provides the foundation for our teachers to really ask our children in whatever subject they're studying to be very creative in the way they solve problems.
Which is really inspiring. And yet, because I'm in a country where there's a level of cynicism about the more well-being aspects of education, particularly currently. The question that a British educator would probably ask is, well, that's fine. The kids are doing arts. They're finding out who they want to be. They're living together as this kind of social experiment, but they've got to get on to university. So just tell us a little bit about the results, the outcomes that you get.
Well, our children go on to a range of colleges, and a third of them go to the most selective colleges in the country. And I think that the academics, I mean, our children, are commended national merit scholars. I mean, they win presidential arts awards. I mean, we have one of the top 10 debate teams in the country, number one in Los Angeles. We have an internationally competitive robotics team. And this comes from their passion. They excel in the college process, one, because they know themselves. Number two, they know how to tell their stories in a very compelling way. And they know, to use the business term, what their value add is going to be in a community. And they do still have, because we have to still make them all ready for our University of California system. So we exceed all the academic requirements of the UCs by almost a year in every subject area. So all of our kids still are prepared for the top state system in the United States. And they still have choice and freedom to explore who they are. And by 11th and 12th grade, they're really delving deeply into an area of passion that they have. And they're very informed about what their next choice should be in terms of a college. So it doesn't come just down to brand name. It comes down to what is the environment that you need next in order to continue your growth. Because as we see school, it's an incubator of human potential and human development.
Which is phenomenal, and what people who may be watching this may not be aware is that the emphasis upon the arts is actually serving the local employers, because being based in Santa Monica, you're at the heart of the media industry.
Yeah, so our kids, they learn how, I mean, for instance, our kids learn coding in the context of the media industry because we're in Los Angeles. And so they see the relevance of the coding. Our coding program is not just decontextualized and abstract. Everything that we do, we try to make it relevant. I always tell the teachers, why does this matter? Who cares? Why should we be teaching it? Just because it's in a textbook?
Sure. And one of the other things that's always struck me when I visited the school is the extent to which the students have a really key role in determining the direction of the school. Just talk us through the town hall meetings.
Well, the town hall meetings are really, I call it sort of our secular church, because there are times for celebration, the expression of talent, debating sort of contemporary issues that the students care about, and trying to make sense of what's going on in the world. They are opportunities for them, not only to be comfortable and to practice public speaking, but to really express themselves in where they are in their own journey. And I've seen that happen in such powerful ways with students who are going through their own racial identity development. Like, some of these students have been able to talk about their journeys in front of an auditorium of other students who've held them. And that's why when people talk about, the dichotomy between well-being and their intellectual development, I think that's a false dichotomy. I think that actually having this very connected community that is loving and respectful and compassionate creates the container for optimal learning. And I think that the foundation of the liberation of human potential starts with the well-being and the secure attachment. We work with our teachers a lot on, interpersonal neurobiology. So they learn the science of building relationships and realize that the school, setting, as well as each classroom, is a social emotional field. And you can create that in a way that optimizes learning, or you can damage the learning.
Could we just unpick that a little bit? When you say a social and emotional field, what does that look like in practice?
Well, it means that it's kind of what it looks like in practice is how do you treat the children in the classroom? It goes back to this idea of the secure attachment that children are seen, they are heard, they're valued, and they're soothed. You put the humanity back in the classroom. So even in the high school, we don't teach them as disembodied brains. We realize that you must be aware of their human needs and that the learning, and we know this from the fight, flight, or freeze response, that they, if you aren't attending to their needs and giving them tools to attend to their needs, then they're not learning at an optimal level. And so I think we need to stop this with the notion that either you care about their well-being or you care about their intellect.
Well, let's preface the next question around what happened on one of my visits. It was the day after, I think, Donald Trump had made a statement about the Dreamers, the DACA Act, and a number of your students wanted to protest. Some, however, felt a bit uncomfortable, and could you just explain what actually happened? Because I think it goes to that question of respect for others.
Well, I think that, yes, it was, there was a question about the Dreamers and what would happen with DACA, and Trump, was acting to make that null and void. And our students wanted to, many of them raise their voices, but our school is not a monolith. And our students do have different perspectives because they come from 85 different zip codes and they come from different families. And we realize that, our role as an intellectual institution is to ensure that our kids are participating in a deliberative dialogue where they can truly hear and respect other people. So during that day, there was a large number of kids who wanted to do the protest, but there were kids who were not sure what their views were, and there were kids who did not agree. And those kids had the choice to stay on campus, and that was respected, because I think part of what's broken down in democracy is this notion of a deliberative process of discourse. And so one of the things we train our kids to do is to listen. I think listening is one of the greatest tools of learning, and to try to listen first without judgment and to try to gain understanding, and then to realize that you may not be in agreement in the moment and that you need to respect that, and that you can still have a relationship with one another even though you don't agree on a particular issue.
And it's an amazing thing to see. It's obviously a really difficult time in America right now. And, you talked about the social experiment, and you wrote a beautiful letter to parents and people who were invested in the school, not just the students, after the murder of George Floyd. Could you share with us what drove you to write that letter, given your own perspective?
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the things that New Roads really prides itself in is being authentic, and having everyone kind of show up as their authentic selves. And I tend to be a very private person, and talking about my own experience with systemic racism was very challenging for me, because it felt so deeply personal. And I didn't know whether or not it would change my community's perception of me, because I think they don't necessarily see me as connected to the George Floyds of the world. But I had to create that bridge for my community so that they could humanize this issue, and it wasn't simply an abstraction. And so I ended up writing to them about what my mother told me at 6 years old, when she told me Racism's never going to change. You are always going to have to work 10 times harder and overcome more obstacles. But you can get to where you want to go, and never, ever fight with the police, because you can end up dead. And I almost did once, because I was racially profiled a few times, but in this one particular incident that I wrote about in this letter, I was in Boston and I was looking for a parking space, which was very difficult by my apartment building. And so sometimes I would drive for about 30 minutes every night to find a parking space. And finally, I found one and I was about to back into it. And then I backed into a car. And I was shocked because I didn't see a car. And then a policeman came up to my door and said, "You hit my car." And I realized that he had been following me. And a heated altercation ensued. And I lost my temper. And at the same time that I lost my temper with him, I could hear my mother's voice saying, "Please, Luthern, please don't say anything. He can kill you. Please, please stop it." But I couldn't control myself. And in that instant, I realized that she was probably right. And I've always been, David, you and I talked about this, the first in almost every job I've ever had. There's, a good friend of mine who's African American. He just passed away from a massive heart attack, and he was like a little brother to me. And he and I were two of the three African American heads in Southern California. I guess there are 6 in California and 49 in the country. The reported 1,400 schools that reported on that particular survey. And so it's, I experienced all this firsthand. And I think it's part of what drew me to New Roads was that my parents, that came from a family of 5, and I grew up in Los Angeles when I was really young, in a very working class African American community. And my parents knew that on the other side of this, of the valley where I grew up, it was much more affluent, it was much more white, and the students were several grades ahead in terms of their achievement. And my parents said, "We can't afford private school, but we can move you there." And that's when I think this idea that your zip code shouldn't determine the quality of your education, which is a tool of social mobility and self-determination. And that's, what New Roads is about. So I found the perfect school to align with my vision of what education should do.
Which is a really powerful story, and thank you for sharing that so honestly. So I wonder, given we've now had Kenosha, yesterday it was Portland, it feels from the outside looking in as though the country's a tinderbox. It doesn't feel like it would take much to really blow up. And I wonder how your African American students are feeling. How do we give students hope at a time like this?
I think that I'm kind of double downing on the sense that we need to equip these youth in ways that are more substantial to be able to dismantle systemic oppression, including institutional racism. And so we're looking very hard right now at our curriculum in terms of not only making sure that our students are informed, but that they understand systemic change and they understand how to impact systemic change. Because I think one of the risks we run with the youth right now is that there is the passion for justice and for equity and equality, but I don't think they necessarily have the know-how to be able to effect systemic change. And so we're looking very closely, particularly at our high school curriculum, in terms of what are the tools that they need to be able to impact systemic change. And so to me, giving them a path forward to know how to actually impact change over time, because, it took America 400 years to get here. It's not going to change overnight. But I think we can take a much more strategic approach to having incremental change if the youth are able to translate their passion into systemic action.
And has the division that we've seen, the polarization because of the murder of George Floyd, has that created any tension between any of your students?
Well, I think that our students have a deep sense of humanity, and they embrace humanity. And it was interesting. I sent you a presentation that I did this week with our K through 12, and it was slightly different for each division, but it was a similar message. One of our commitments as a school is we model compassion. And I spent time with our children talking about the roots of the word compassion, and that it means to suffer with, and I said, beyond all of these other issues, what does it mean in word and deed for us to suffer with somebody else and to care about those who are most vulnerable? And I was sort of, whether that is situations that happen in elementary school, because I told the kids about a story of a child who was being mistreated when I was in second grade, and I knew it was wrong in my heart, but I didn't want to do anything because I didn't want to lose friends, and I didn't want the kids to turn on me. And so I realized there was potentially a sacrifice. So I let it go on for a while. And then finally I did say something, and I told them I did lose people. People did turn against me. But I knew that that was in my heart the right thing to do. And so I think our students may disagree on the solutions to particular problems, but I think they are in agreement in terms of embracing the full spectrum of humanity. And so the suffering of anyone is something that I think is a concern to them.
And yeah, when I've visited it, that's always been palpable, that sense of care and concern for one another, regardless of background. One of the other things that struck me last time I visited was you always present students who talk about their aspirations, and there was one student there, and she said, because we asked the inevitable question, where do you see yourself going? And I think she said, when I first came here, I wanted to be an entrepreneur and work in the media industry. And she said, but now I want to be a community activist. And I just wonder, over the past 4 years, I'm sure that might just be coincidental, but have you seen a rise in the number of students who want to be social activists?
Well, it's interesting, David. One of the signs said, because how we always have the signs with the messages, on the campus, and one of them during the march said, "When our students become our teachers." And I think that what I sense in our students, and I do sense this more generally in the country, and I think globally, is I think they largely feel that adults have failed them, that they can't trust the adults to secure their futures. So they're going to have to do it. And so I think they have a sense of urgency, those who are not paralyzed by this, because I think at the same time, there's an epidemic of mental illness, of anxiety, of depression, of suicidal ideation. So I think there are some who've just given up. And then I think there are others who are like, we have to fight, and we have to fight for our lives and our futures, because the adults, they are not committed to us and our future and our well-being. And so, yes, I do see many of them saying, we have to grow up fast, and we have to put these problems on our own.
Wow. I just want to tell people, because you're too modest, what happens when we do our study tours, which is that for the past 5 years, I guess, we've been taking educators from all around the world, and they go to some of the the most innovative schools in California. And at the end of it, I always say to them, okay, you can only send your own children to one of the schools that you visited. And unanimously, and I mean unanimously, over 5 years, every single person has said it would be New Roads. And I know you wouldn't boast about that, but I think it's an incredible achievement, especially given the other schools that they've seen. What do you think is the thing that really works? Because when I'm there, I get a feeling, but sometimes it's kind of hard to define it.
Well, I think, David, it's interesting. I always say the magic is in the mess at New Roads, and I wrote an article about that. And the more I've been at the school, I think it's in the soil. It's the climate and culture. I think the climate and culture is one of love, respect, and compassion. And I think it creates a generative field, where it's a healthy place for children to become and to discover who they were intended to be, and to use and to find out what their gifts are to bring into the world, and to develop not only their minds and their ingenuity, but the wisdom of the heart. Because I think quite often as human beings, we have the intellect to create whatever we can imagine, but we have often shown that we don't have the moral development to govern it responsibly. And I think New Roads tries to do both. And I think you feel that humanity and the embracing of humanity and the other are one of our director of student life. He said about New Roads, if you come to us and you show us who you are, chances are we're going to embrace you.
Wow. Oh, you've done it again. I'm going to start crying again. So I'm going to stop at that point, but I just want to thank you for what you're doing, because at a time like this, it seems to me we need more schools like New Roads. We need more principals who are not afraid to talk about love and compassion, and yet you still achieve extraordinary results. It seems to me that you don't just talk about diversity, it's there in the people who work there. I've seen it. It's one of the most diverse group of educators I've ever seen in my life. And it's just an incredible place. I would just urge anyone who watches this, if you're anywhere near Los Angeles, please go visit New Roads. It's an amazing school.
Well, we love you, David. You are one of our tribe.
Well, thank you for that. Listen, take care, stay safe. Have you any idea when you might open up again face to face?
It's very hard to know at this point, because right now, while it seems that the data is trending in the right direction in Los Angeles, it's not just the medical data that's driving and the scientific data that's driving decision making. So it's very hard to know what combination of factors will allow us to actually go back to school.
Yeah. Well, these are strange times, but I couldn't think of a better group of people to look after my own kids than you guys. It's just an amazing place. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
And stay safe.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.